So, now that the kings of Rome have been overthrown and the rule of law and of the people has been established, let's get into how the Republic actually works. And I just want to say before I start that this is by no means an exhaustive list of how the Republic appeared throughout the entirety of its life, but merely shows how it was right before it was taken out back and force-fed a little lead. So let's start like this, like we're plebs who live in the actual city of Rome, or in one of the holdings just outside the city. We would be in the very last vote of the Centuriate Assembly, or Comitia Centuriata, and kept in reserve for if the rich are unable to come to agreement on who to choose for a certain election, be it for consulship or whatever, right? And so you may be wondering, how does one even choose at all? Like, how does this voting even happen? Like, you've said in the past that it's groups of 100 people, and like they would vote a certain way, and they also follow the same formation of first past the post as many of our elections today. But they did it a little different, right? Romans in their republic can find some of their characteristics inside the Athenian democracy, wherein the people would actually vocally or physically express their votes, and these would be tallied. And, I talked about this in the past video, left out some details just so that this video wouldn't be redundant and to shorten the length of it because it was already a pretty long video. And I know if I'd stretched it out to like an hour and a half, no one would watch it. So I'm just going to keep on moving. So Romans wouldn't put just two candidates on the rostra in the field of Mars, which is where the voting would be taking place. They would be divided by class, organized in defense of 100 men, and starting with the richest of the rich, your Marcus Licinius Crassuses, your Jeff Bezoses, Bill Gateses, what have you, they would go to the pen and tally each of the votes for consul, praetor, aedile, quaestor, tribunus, plebis, whatever is on the docket for that day. And so let's say for consul you have five candidates: a guy named Gaius, a guy named Publius, a guy named Lucius, a guy named Gnaeus, and a guy named Quintus. So the patricians and equites, which are the two highest classes, patricians being like, the people who were born into power, equites being people who are rich enough to be a patrician but aren't a patrician. And they're called equites because they're the first rank able to buy their own horses, back, to the pre-Marian reforms where you actually had to provide your own gear. Yes. So they both really like Gaius and Gnaeus since they are optimates and will not touch any of the holdings of the rich. They won't do any land redistribution, which is very common among populares or whatever. And so thus the patricians will commonly vote equally for Gaius and Gnaeus. And I can hear you asking, wait, why would you vote for two people? Well, that's because whoever comes in second in the consular vote becomes the co-consul. And, consular power will move on, but we'll get to there. So the patricians in the first line of voting, they vote 51% for Gaius, 49% for Gnaeus. Next comes the equites, who vote 47% for Gaius, 53% for Gnaeus. And the rich plebs, yes, that is a class, vote 30 Gaius, 20 Gnaeus, 50 Lucius. But it doesn't matter, because the votes given to Gaius and Gnaeus pushed Gaius over the halfway point, therefore voting is over. And Gnaeus, coming in second place, will be his co-consul. And so in case you forgot, we were the plebs. Who would you have voted for, right? Would it even have mattered? Frankly, no. No, it doesn't matter who you think would go well as consul. Whoever won likely either gained the support of the rich through promises, or when the promises failed to land, by pressing bags of coins into their hands. So maybe us being plebs was not a great idea for me. Sorry. So Gaius and Gnaeus won the election. Congrats to them. These elections happen once a year, so they each have around 6 months as consul. This is known as holding fasces, or fasces, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And yes, that is where the term fascist comes from, since the fasces was a bundle of sticks around an axe head carried by lictors who followed and protected the consuls. Think of bodyguards. Fasces, being the power of Rome, was given to a consul every other month. Not physically, but metaphorically. And like saying, you have power, you have the floor, please speak, whatever. And they were given every month, starting with the one who received the most votes in the election. And that person would be the first to start in January of the year following the election. And so, speaking of the year of consulship, the Romans would say that whatever year something was based on was whoever was consul that year, much like the Greeks would measure their time based on which Olympiad something happened in. And to name this time, they would say during the consulship of Gaius and Gnaeus, whatever their family names were. But since they didn't do family names, that's what they would have called them. So, for example, in 649 AUC, ad orbe candida, Julius Caesar, however you want to say it, was elected alongside Bibulus, which should have had it named, the consulship of Caesar and Bibulus. But Kaiser dunked on him while Kaiser was holding fasces, and so Bibulus stayed at home and messed with the calendar on which days holidays fell on, so that they would happen on days where Kaiser held votes, that type of thing. And normally this would negate the vote, but since Bibulus never showed up, and Kaiser was Pontifex Maximus, no one really cared. If the head priest says that today is fine for a vote, today is fine for a vote. It doesn't matter what that idiot who's saying it at home thinks. And thus, Caesar's consulship was called the consulship of Julius and Caesar. And so, while the consuls put forward legislation to be voted on by the Senate, they weren't alone in this power. The other people that could are the Tribunes Plebis, or tribunes of the plebs, and Tribuni Plebis were supposed to be from plebeian families and elected on by plebs, or the popular assembly. And this position was made so that the patricians couldn't make laws without passing in front of the plebeian representatives and confirmed again by the popular assembly. This could actually legally be gamed, and Caesar did it in his year's consulship. He put forward a bill, and while the Senate was filibustering it, and by the Senate I mean Cato Minor, screw you, Cato, if you're listening to this. I know you aren't, but screw you. He took it to the popular assembly before his month of consular power ended, thus he could get the vote passed. And if I remember correctly, this was a land redistribution bill. Land redistribution is very popular among populares. And him doing this was technically a faux pas, but nothing legally said that he couldn't do it. Therefore he did. Hooray for him. And so what about the senators who vote on these legislations? What did they do? How did they get to their position? Do you vote on senators each election? Well, when the voting happens, they would vote on people to fill the positions in the Senate that had been emptied for whatever reason. Just like in modern parliamentary or senatorial or congressional elections. Whichever position is open, you run an election for it. And whichever position that you could step forward into was determined by where you are in what is known as the Cursus Honorum, which, as you can probably guess, means the course or path of honors. And you'd be right. So step 0 in the Cursus Honorum was the Militum Tribunum, or military tribune, whose job it is to work alongside the legates or legates, however you want to say it, or generals of the legions, in order to learn about how to command troops and a lot of the clerical tasks associated with the role of legate. This is a non-senatorial rank, and therefore non-elected. And it is also non-essential for being in the Senate. So what's the point, right? It's a great opportunity to get some renown before throwing your hat into the political ring. Like, for instance, before Caesar started his, run, he served as a military tribune in Spain. So we got to start there. He showed that he could hold some sort of military command or any kind of command. He learned under an important dude, some dude that the Senate trusted, that the people trusted, and he was able to do it. Bada bing, bada boom. So you've done it. You've become a military tribune. Well, what's next? Well, you'd have to wait a couple years because there's certain age requirements for these, but those were only instituted under Sulla, so I'm just not going to mention the age requirements because it's not necessary. So step 1 in the path is known as the rank of Quaestor, or your general accountant. And as a rule of thumb, they were sent out to provinces to work under the proconsul or propraetor that was in control, which just means that they are technically still within their role of command, albeit away from Rome, and without the means to return to a position of power for a few years. Kind of putting someone out to pasture to make sure that they don't get too ambitious. And Quaestors could also be stationed in the Temple of Saturn, which is where the Roman treasury was held, and do the same kind of, financial clerical task that they would in any of the other provinces, except they wouldn't have to leave Rome. It's a nice little cushy job. There were something like 30 of these people at one time, and most of them would be ex-Quaestors who were unable to or too young to make it to the next rank, which, as it so happens, is a technically optional path called the Aedile. So Julius Caesar also served in this position, and during his term as Aedile, he was famous for taking out vast loans from large swaths of the people in order to host the most lavish of games for the people, knowing that it would ingratiate himself with the popular vote going into his term as Praetor and eventually Consul. And that is exactly what duties in the Aediles have. They were to plan the festivals, put forward the funds to host them. I mean, use your imagination with this one, like, go nuts. They did it. First among the offices that grant legal immunity known as imperium, and yes, that is where the word empire comes from, but this means command. And in that vein, imperator is the word that soldiers would use to demarcate a legate as deserving a triumph. Yeah, and it later became emperor, but whatever. Back to praetorship. So these people would normally serve a wide array of tasks, from delegates to mediators, but they mainly served as judges in legal cases. Really makes one not get absolutely sleepy thinking or hearing about them, so I'll just keep this rolling along. In addition to being immune from legal prosecution during their term, they are also the first rank to receive land as part of their post-term concessions. There, they would serve as the military, judicial, and financial leader, as the next people consuls do as well. And so the final elected rank, consuls. They're kind of like presidents of the Roman time. Their term lasted a year, unless something screwy came up and that necessitated the Senate handing over all power of the state to them. But even this office only technically lasted 6 months. And one interesting story of this was a guy named Cincinnatus, which is actually where we get the city name of Cincinnati. So Cincinnatus, he was given a dictatorship to stop a big invasion. And so what he did is he stopped the invasion and then handed over the power back. I think he was in power for like a week or 2 weeks. He's a great example of like the American George Washington. He served his term, he did what was necessary to get it started, and he set the mold for everyone else. But of course, being that, whenever you set a mold, some people are like, well, I want to try and break it. Yeah, people would do that too. Even Julius Caesar did that. And you know how I like talking about him. And so the actual thing that they would use to make someone a dictator, which is what the term was, and not so to clarify, dictator or dictator just meant someone who has military power or is granted some sort of extreme authoritarian power. It doesn't mean, well, to Greeks, dictator meant someone who took by power. To Romans, dictator meant someone who has military power granted to them. So it's not the modern understanding of someone who's very authoritarian and does everything in their power to make sure that they don't give up any of the power that they have. So, not that, don't worry about it. Dictators in this time, they just do kind of their thing. And their terms do run out, and the Senate does take the power back. So it's not like they, hold on to it forever, unless your name is Julius and Caesar. And so the final rank, and this is not really an official one, and since it's not one that was elected by the people, but it's one that was really important to the circulation and use of a lot of the senatorial tasks that they would have to go about. And this one is known as censor, or censor. And so the duties of the censors was not, as you might think, to keep proper discourse among people, although they were looked upon as the most senior of magistrates, even among elected consuls, and their words were taken very seriously. But it was to read this legislation of the Senate as a neutral third party, and also to task quaestors and the like with censuses, hence their name. And this is the very basics of the Republic of Rome, at least enough to where I can mention these terms and feel confident that I've at least covered the basics of what they are and what they mean. And these are also some of their inner workings, and, there you go. And so don't forget, never forget, Rome is light, Rome is love, Rome is life, Rome is happiness, and Rome is eternal, and its glory may never perish so long as you keep it in your mind. Have a good night.